My daughter took my pension and went to the seaside, leaving me without food. She came back tanned and happy, thinking that I would beg her for help. But when she opened the refrigerator to have dinner, she screamed in horror at what she saw there. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin telling this complicated story of my life, I ask you to support our channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. This is very important for us. And now, enjoy listening. My name is Emily Parker, and I am 67 years old. At that age, time no longer rushes forward. It settles heavy and deliberate on your shoulders. You feel every year not as a number, but as a collection of mornings your body argues with, and evenings that come too early. I had learned to live quietly inside that rhythm. My pension made it possible. It was modest, earned penny by penny across decades of clerical work, skipped vacations, and lunches packed in wax paper. It wasn't luxury, but it was security, or so I believed. The day my daughter Rachel took it, shock didn't arrive loudly. It came like a sudden cold in the bones, the kind that makes you stand still because moving feels dangerous. She didn't slam the door or shout. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, she moved through the apartment with careless familiarity, opening drawers, checking her phone, humming under her breath. She looked light, unburdened, happy even. When she leaned down and kissed my cheek, her skin was warm, her perfume sharp and expensive. Too expensive, I realized too late. Relax, Mom. I'll be back soon, she said, already reaching for her suitcase. I remember nodding. I remember smiling back. I remember thinking that maybe this was just another one of her impulsive decisions, like the time she quit a job without another lined up, or booked a trip she couldn't afford and expected the world to bend around her. I wanted to believe it was temporary. I wanted to believe she wouldn't go far. When the door closed, the apartment didn't feel empty right away. It felt paused, like a held breath. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum and the ticking of the wall clock. Only later did I check my bank account. Only later did my hands begin to shake. The pension was gone. Not miscalculated. Not delayed. Gone. That money wasn't savings I could replace. It was the thin line between stability and fear. Rent, medication, groceries, heat. Every essential thing in my life was tied to it, balanced carefully like stacked plates. One missing, and everything fell. I told myself not to panic. Panic wastes energy, and I had learned long ago that energy is a finite resource. Instead, I made a list. What I had, what I could stretch, what I could survive without. I told myself Rachel would come to her senses. A mother always does that, believes. Belief becomes instinct after years of forgiving, waiting, and explaining away what hurts too much to confront directly. The first week passed in denial. I ate what was already there, half a loaf of bread, some eggs, a bag of rice. I told myself it was like fasting, like simplifying. I drank more tea than usual because it warmed my stomach and made me feel less hollow. I slept longer to avoid thinking about hunger. At night, I lay awake listening to the pipes knock and the neighbor's television murmuring through the wall, telling myself Rachel would call any day now. The second week stripped the illusion away. The fridge emptied with a finality that felt personal. The cupboards echoed when I opened them, a sound I had never noticed before, but would never forget again. Hunger became constant, not sharp enough to scream, but steady enough to erode. It settled into my joints, into my thoughts. I caught myself rationing not just food, but movement. Standing too long made me dizzy. Cooking became pointless when there was nothing left to cook. I didn't tell anyone. Pride is a stubborn thing, especially in women my age. I had spent my life being the one who managed, who adjusted, who made do. Asking for help felt like confessing failure, not just as a mother, but as a person who was supposed to know better by now. I told myself Rachel was young, careless, not cruel. I told myself she didn't mean to leave me like this. But hunger has a way of sharpening memory. It drags old moments into the light and forces you to look at them honestly. I remembered the first time she borrowed money and didn't return it. The second, the casual way she spoke about my pension as if it were an abstract concept, not the result of a lifetime of restraint. I remembered how often I had excused her behavior because loving her felt easier than confronting her. By the third week, belief became something heavier. It turned into waiting for a message, waiting for footsteps in the hallway, waiting for the sound of my phone lighting up with her name. Each day that passed without word pressed harder on my chest. Hunger gnawed, but the silence hurt more. It told me something I didn't want to hear, that she hadn't just taken my money. She had taken my certainty that I still mattered. Still, I waited, because that is what mothers do when there is nothing left to give but hope. Weeks later, Rachel returned as if she were stepping back into a life she had merely paused, not abandoned. I heard her before I saw her, the quick, confident rhythm of her steps in the hallway, the metallic jingle of keys, the careless laugh spilling from her phone. That laugh cut through me more sharply than hunger ever had. It was light, unburdened, untouched by consequence. When the door opened, sunlight followed her in, clinging to her skin as if the seaside had marked her as its own. She was tanned, her face glowing with health, her hair lighter at the ends. Her clothes were loose and bright, chosen for comfort rather than necessity. She smelled of sunscreen and salt and something sweet I couldn't name, a scent so alive it felt almost offensive in my dim apartment. Freedom radiated from her, not the quiet freedom of safety, but the reckless kind that assumes someone else will absorb the cost. She barely looked at me at first. Her attention stayed fixed on her phone as she murmured goodbye to whoever was on the other end, her voice soft in a way I had not heard in weeks. When she finally glanced up, it wasn't with guilt or concern. It was with mild irritation, like she had expected something else and been disappointed by the sight of me still standing there. "Well," she said, letting her bag drop to the floor, "you didn't call." The words settled between us, heavy and accusing. I felt suddenly smaller under her gaze, not because I was weak, but because she had decided I should be. Her eyes swept over me quickly, assessing, calculating. I realized then that she had come back not to apologize, not to explain, but to measure how much damage she had done. "I thought you'd be begging by now," she added, her tone casual, almost amused. That was when hatred bloomed in my chest, not the dramatic kind that makes you shout or tremble, but something sharper, colder. It surprised me with its clarity. I had felt fear. I had felt hunger. I had even felt sorrow for her, imagining excuses for her absence. But this was different. This was the sudden, painful understanding that she had wanted my desperation, that she had left me not just without money, but with the expectation that I would break. I didn't respond. My voice, I knew, would betray me. Silence was the only thing I still controlled. Rachel exhaled, clearly uninterested in waiting. She kicked off her shoes and walked past me as if the apartment belonged to her, as if nothing had changed. Her suitcase scraped against the wall, leaving a faint mark I would later scrub at with too much force. She moved toward the kitchen, stretching her arms overhead, relaxed and unbothered. "I'm starving," she said, the word light on her tongue, stripped of meaning. She didn't know starvation. Not the kind that hollows you out slowly. That teaches you the exact point where dizziness turns into fear. Her hunger was an inconvenience, nothing more. I stayed where I was, my back straight, my hands folded in front of me. From the doorway, I watched her open cabinets without looking inside, confident food would be there. She hummed again, the same careless tune from before. The refrigerator door creaked as she pulled it open, and for a fraction of a second, the familiar hum filled the space between us. That moment stretched. I saw her posture change before I heard anything, her shoulders stiffening, her head tilting slightly as if her eyes were refusing to understand what they were seeing. Confusion crossed her face first, then disbelief. The easy confidence drained from her expression, replaced by something brittle. She leaned closer, peering into the refrigerator as though the contents might rearrange themselves if she looked hard enough. The light inside cast harsh shadows on her face, stripping away the glow of her tan and revealing the truth beneath it. Her lips parted, and the sound that escaped her was not a word, but a sharp intake of breath. I felt no satisfaction then, only a steady, unflinching resolve. I had spent weeks being invisible to her suffering, or rather to her indifference. Now she was being forced to see the space she had left behind. Not my pain. Not yet. Just the absence. The proof. She turned her head slightly, as if to speak, then looked back into the refrigerator again, her hand still gripping the door. Her fingers tightened around the handle, knuckles whitening. Whatever she had expected to find there, comfort, reassurance, control, it was not waiting for her. And I stood there watching, knowing that the balance between us had shifted, and that the reckoning she had never imagined was only beginning. Her scream was raw, animal, full of terror, the kind that bypasses language and goes straight to the nerves. It didn't echo. It seemed to claw at the walls and sink into them. I had imagined many reactions in the long nights when hunger kept me awake, but not that sound. Still, when it came, I didn't move. My body remained where it was, as if rooted to the floor by something older than fear or mercy. The refrigerator stood open between us like a confession that could no longer be taken back. Inside were dozens of plastic containers, each scrubbed clean, each labeled in my careful, precise handwriting. I had taken my time with them. Time was the one thing I still possessed in abundance. The labels were neat, deliberate, impossible to misunderstand. There was no food, no leftovers, no comfort hidden behind jars or cartons, only evidence. Rachel's eyes moved frantically from one container to the next, her breath coming fast and shallow. She reached in and lifted the first one, her fingers trembling. Inside lay my wedding ring, duller now than it once was, its gold worn thin from decades of work and washing and living. The ring I had never taken off until hunger taught me that sentiment does not fill a stomach. I had wrapped it in a scrap of cloth before sealing the container, an instinctive, almost tender gesture. She dropped it and grabbed another. My late husband John's watch stared back at her, its cracked face frozen at the hour he died. I remembered the weight of it in my palm when I first considered selling it, how my hand had closed around it reflexively, as if letting go would erase him entirely. I had chosen not to sell it, not because it wasn't valuable, but because some things, once gone, leave a silence that no money can repair. Rachel's breath hitched. She backed away slightly, then leaned forward again, as though drawn by a force she didn't understand. The next container held her childhood drawings, crayon suns, crooked houses, a stick figure family labeled in uneven letters. Mom, Dad, me. I had kept them all these years in a folder under my bed, proof of a time when love felt uncomplicated and mutual. I had almost laughed when I labeled that container. Almost. There were photographs, too. Black and white ones from before Rachel was born. Color prints faded at the edges. Birthdays, holidays. Faces of people who were gone now, smiling at moments they could not know would one day be reduced to objects behind plastic. Each photo represented a choice: eat today or keep this memory intact. Her hand shook so badly she had to brace herself against the fridge door. The sound of plastic tapping plastic filled the silence, sharp and obscene. She had gone pale beneath the tan, the color draining from her face in uneven patches. Whatever story she had told herself on the way home, whatever version of me she had imagined, was collapsing under the weight of what she was seeing. Then she saw the medication bottles. They were lined up on the bottom shelf, labels facing outward. My name, dosages, refill dates that had long since passed. The bottles were empty, their child-proof caps twisted back on with care, as if I were still pretending order mattered. She picked one up, turned it over, shook it. The hollow rattle made her flinch. Only then did she notice the note. It was taped to the back wall of the refrigerator, centered, impossible to miss once you knew to look. My handwriting again, steady despite the circumstances under which it had been written. I had practiced the sentence once on scrap paper before committing it to ink. Not because I doubted the words, but because I needed them to be exact. This is what hunger looks like when it isn't visible. Rachel read it once, then again. Her lips moved silently the second time, as if she were trying to sound it out, trying to make it mean something else. Her knees buckled, and she staggered back, one hand flying to her mouth. She looked at me then, not with annoyance, not with entitlement, but with something close to fear. I watched her carefully, noting the way her chest rose and fell, the way her eyes darted between me and the refrigerator as though unsure which was more dangerous. There was a strange calm inside me, a stillness I hadn't felt since before she left. I realized distantly that I was no longer hungry. The ache was there, yes, but it had been replaced by something firmer. Resolve, perhaps, or truth. I had not done this to punish her. That was the lie she would likely tell herself later. I had done it because words had failed me, because explanations had been ignored, because suffering, when it is quiet and invisible, is easily dismissed, especially when it belongs to someone society has already decided should endure. Each container was a sentence I had not been allowed to speak. Each object was a day I had survived without asking her for anything. I had not begged. I had not called. Not because I was proud, but because I needed her to understand that dependence was not the same as weakness, and that withdrawing help does not erase responsibility. Rachel slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her back against the cabinets. The refrigerator door remained open, its light spilling into the room, illuminating everything she had refused to see. She pressed her palms to her eyes, dragging them down her face, leaving streaks of mascara behind. For a moment, she looked younger, lost, overwhelmed, stripped of her confidence. I still did not move. The truth, once revealed, does not require commentary. It stands on its own, cold and undeniable. And as Rachel sat there, surrounded by the physical proof of my hunger, My silence became the loudest thing in the room. Anger erupted from Rachel as if it had been waiting just beneath her skin, searching for a way out. It came fast and loud, filling the kitchen, colliding with the open refrigerator door and ricocheting back at me. She scrambled to her feet, hands shaking, face twisted not with shame, but with fury, as though the weight of what she had seen was too heavy to carry and had to be thrown back at me instead. "This is sick," she snapped. "This is cruel. You're trying to punish me. You're manipulating me." Her voice cracked, then hardened again, defensive and sharp. "You've always been dramatic, Mom. Always turning things into a performance." Each word was a familiar weapon. I had heard variations of them before, softened by time, disguised as jokes or impatience. But now they were stripped bare, hurled with the full force of her fear. She paced the length of the kitchen, running her hands through her hair, knocking a chair out of place without noticing. She refused to look at the refrigerator again, refused to look at me. Something in me shifted then. Not suddenly, not violently, but with the slow, deliberate certainty of a door closing. I had swallowed my anger for years, telling myself that restraint was love, that endurance was kindness. Hunger had taught me otherwise. Hunger had burned away the excess, leaving only what was essential. When I spoke, my voice surprised us both. It was calm, steady, not raised. Fury does not always roar. Sometimes it sharpens. "You don't get to call this dramatic," I said. "Not after what you did." She turned on me, eyes flashing. "I didn't do this. You did. You could have called. You could have asked for help." I nodded once slowly. "And you could have left me enough to eat." The words landed between us with a dull finality. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't stop. The dam had broken, and I was done protecting her from the truth. I told her about the nights I drank water until my stomach sloshed, convincing myself that it was fullness. About standing at the sink at 3 a.m, sipping slowly so the sensation would last longer. About how hunger hums when the world goes quiet, how it seeps into your thoughts until even memories feel exhausting. I told her about selling the furniture. The armchair where John used to sit with the paper folded neatly in his lap. The side table I had refinished myself years ago, its drawer still smelling faintly of lemon oil. Each piece sold to strangers who didn't know or care what they were taking with them. I described the way I stood in the empty spaces afterward, measuring loss not in dollars, but in echoes. Her face paled again, but I kept going. I told her about the choices, not whether to eat, but what part of my life to trade for it. The calculation that happens when hunger becomes routine. The way you assess memories like assets, which ones you can bear to lose. Which ones might keep you alive a little longer if you let them go. "I held your drawings in my hands," I said, watching her flinch. "I weighed them against a week of groceries. Do you know what that feels like?" She shook her head violently, as if trying to dislodge the image. "Stop," she whispered, but the word carried no authority. For once, I was not stopping for her comfort. I told her about the medication I rationed, about reading labels like puzzles, stretching dosages beyond what was safe, because eating or breathing felt like a choice I shouldn't have to make. I told her about the fear that came with dizziness, not the fear of dying, but the fear of dying unnoticed, quietly, in an apartment that no one thought to check. Rachel pressed her palms over her ears, tears spilling down her cheeks now, messy and uncontrolled. "You're trying to make me feel guilty," she sobbed. "No," I said, and there was no softness left in my voice. "I'm trying to make you understand." She looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps she was. Hunger changes you. So does being forced to confront the limits of love. You thought I'd beg, I continued, my tone almost conversational. You thought I'd break, that I'd call and cry and ask you to come save me. I stepped aside then, gesturing toward the open refrigerator. So I prepared dinner for you instead. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. The injustice she had created stared back at her from every shelf, every container, every empty bottle. It was no longer abstract. It had weight, shape, consequence. Rachel's shoulders slumped. Her anger had nowhere left to go. It drained out of her, leaving exhaustion in its place. She sank back into the chair she had knocked aside earlier, her hands limp in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. For the first time since she walked through the door, she had nothing to say. And for the first time in weeks, neither did I feel the need to defend myself. Her anger did not fade gradually. It collapsed, folding inward on itself as if the force holding it upright had suddenly been removed. What replaced it was panic, raw, unfiltered, and unmistakable. I recognized it immediately, not because I had seen it in her before, but because I had lived inside it for weeks. Panic has a particular texture. It makes the eyes dart, the breath shorten, the hands search for something solid that no longer exists. Rachel's confidence disintegrated in front of me. The woman who had returned, sun-warmed and careless, now looked stranded, as though the floor beneath her had given way, and she was only just realizing how far she might fall. Her breathing became uneven. She pressed a hand to her chest, then dragged it down as if trying to steady herself from the outside. I didn't. She started, then stopped. The sentence had nowhere to go. Excuses require distance, and there was none left. She looked again at the refrigerator, but this time she did not flinch away. Her gaze lingered on the containers, on the order I had imposed on my deprivation. The neatness unsettled her more than chaos would have. Chaos can be dismissed as emotion. This was structure. This was intention. This was survival. I didn't think it was like this, she said finally, her voice small, stripped of accusation. I don't know what I thought. That more than anything else told me she was beginning to understand. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Understanding rarely arrives all at once. It comes in fragments, sharp and uncomfortable, forcing their way in through cracks we didn't know were there. She sank back into the chair again, but this time she didn't fold into herself defensively. Her shoulders curled inward as if she were trying to take up less space. Her hands twisted together in her lap, fingers worrying at each other until her knuckles reddened. Tears welled, then spilled over, unrestrained and unguided. She did not look at me while she cried. She did not reach out. She did not perform grief in search of forgiveness. For the first time, she cried without expecting to be comforted. That distinction mattered more than she could have known. I had spent most of my life responding to her distress automatically, instinctively moving toward her pain, as if it were my responsibility to absorb it. This time I stayed where I was, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. If I stepped in now, if I softened this moment, it would lose its shape. The truth would blur again, and we would return to the familiar imbalance where her feelings eclipsed my reality. She sobbed openly, breath hitching, tears soaking into the fabric of her clothes. The sound was different from her earlier anger, less sharp, more hollow. Panic had stripped away her defenses, leaving her exposed to what she had done. And what she had done, she was finally beginning to see, went far beyond money. She hadn't just taken my pension. She had taken my margin for error, my ability to get sick, my ability to rest, my right to dignity. She had turned my old age into a test of endurance I had never agreed to take. Safety, once broken, does not announce itself with drama. It disappears quietly, and you notice only when you reach for it and find nothing there. I watched her wrestle with that realization, watched it rearrange her understanding of herself. This was not the story she told about who she was. This was not the role she believed she played in my life. And yet, here it was, inescapable, undeniable. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered at last. "I know," I replied, and I did. Intent matters, but it is not absolution. "But you didn't mean to protect me either." She winced, as if struck. The words were not loud, not cruel, but they landed with precision. Protection is an action, not an assumption. Love without responsibility is just sentiment. Her crying slowed, the sobs tapering into uneven breaths. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving smudges she didn't bother to clean. She looked exhausted, wrung out. So did I, though my exhaustion ran deeper, threaded through weeks of vigilance and restraint. I felt no satisfaction watching her like this. That surprised me. I had imagined, in darker moments, that seeing her break might bring relief. It did not. What I felt instead was a solemn certainty. This pain was necessary, not because she deserved to suffer, but because she needed to see. To understand that her actions had consequences that did not vanish just because she returned. Justice, I had learned, is not always gentle. Sometimes it does not arrive with raised voices or punishment. Sometimes it comes as clarity, sharp and unforgiving, stripping away illusions until only truth remains. That kind of justice does not soothe, it educates. Rachel sat in the wreckage of her understanding, and I allowed her to remain there. I did not reach out. I did not offer comfort prematurely. I had given enough of myself to cushioning her from reality. This time, she had to sit with it. The kitchen was quiet except for her breathing and the low hum of the refrigerator. The light inside it still glowed, illuminating the proof of my hunger. I did not close the door. Some things, once opened, should not be hidden again too quickly. I stood there steady, grounded in the knowledge that whatever came next, whatever choices she made, whatever reckoning followed, this moment could not be undone. She had finally seen me. Not as a background presence, not as a safety net, but as a human being whose survival mattered. And that, at last, was a beginning. Rachel's panic did not silence her for long. When the initial shock loosened its grip, words began to spill out of her again, tentative at first, then faster, tangled together in a rush that felt rehearsed by necessity rather than sincerity. She needed reasons, not explanations, reasons that could soften what she had done, that could make it survivable to live with herself. She spoke about burnout first, about how tired she was of always scrambling, of feeling behind everyone else her age. She said she felt trapped, squeezed between rising costs and diminishing patience, as if the world had closed ranks against her and she had nowhere left to stand. She talked about exhaustion as if it were an inheritance she had been denied, as if I had passed down resilience without teaching her its cost. Then came entitlement, though she did not call it that. She framed it as expectation, as assumption. Parents, she said, always survive somehow. They always find a way. They've already lived their lives. The words came out hesitantly, but they were not unfamiliar to her. They had lived comfortably in her thoughts long before she spoke them aloud. "You're stronger than me," she said, her voice cracking again, this time with something like pleading. "You always have been." I thought you'd manage. You always do. There it was, the quiet cruelty of admiration without accountability. The belief that strength is an infinite resource, endlessly renewable, owed to anyone who needs it. She did not mean to be selfish, not consciously. Her fear had narrowed her world until it contained only herself. Immaturity often disguises itself as desperation. I listened. I did not interrupt. Not because her words deserved validation, but because I wanted to hear how she understood herself. People reveal their limits when they justify harm. Each explanation was a thread, and together they wove a portrait that was painfully clear. She spoke of fear, of falling behind, of failing publicly, of becoming invisible. She spoke of how the seaside had felt like air after drowning, how for a moment she could pretend the world was gentle and forgiving. She did not speak of me unless prompted by her own guilt. Even now, even faced with evidence, I existed to her primarily as context for her choices, not as their consequence. When she finally stopped, the silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. It was not charged with anger or panic. It was weighted with inevitability. I took a breath, slow and deliberate. My body felt steady in a way it had not for weeks. Hunger had weakened me physically, but clarity had strengthened something deeper. I was no longer reacting. I was deciding. "I understand why you did it," I said. The words surprised her. She looked up quickly, hope flickering in her eyes, misreading the tone. Understanding is not forgiveness. It is simply recognition. Then I continued. "But your reasons don't change what happened." Her shoulders stiffened. "You didn't just make a bad decision," I said. "You committed theft. Not emotionally. Legally." I watched the color drain from her face again, slower this time, as comprehension settled in. And I treated it as such. Her mouth opened. "What do you mean?" I met her gaze fully then, holding it without hostility, without hesitation. "I contacted a lawyer and social services." The words landed with quiet force. No theatrics, no raised voice, just fact. Her breath caught sharply. "You what?" "I documented everything," I said. "The bank statements, the withdrawal, the timeline, the lack of consent." Each word was measured, chosen with care. "I also documented my condition during that time. The lack of food, the medication gaps, the risks." She shook her head, disbelief giving way to fear. "You didn't have to do that. I'm your daughter." "That's exactly why I did," I replied. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time again, but this time the fear was different. It wasn't fear of what she had done. It was fear of losing control of the narrative she had lived inside. Fear of consequences that could not be talked away. "I didn't report you out of spite," I continued. "I did it because what you did put me in danger, and because pretending otherwise would only invite it to happen again, by you or by someone else." Her eyes filled again, but the tears did not fall. She swallowed hard. "You're going to ruin my life." I considered that, truly considered it. Then I shook my head. "No," I said, "I'm refusing to let you ruin mine." The distinction mattered. I straightened, feeling the weight of the moment settle fully into my spine. "This ends now," I said, "one way or another." She flinched at the finality in my voice. There was no anger in it, no threat, just resolve, the kind that comes when a boundary is no longer theoretical. I won't live in fear of my own child, I went on. I won't protect you from the consequences of something that nearly destroyed me. And I won't accept explanations that excuse harm as long as it comes wrapped in vulnerability. She looked small then, not because I wanted her to feel diminished, but because accountability has a way of stripping away illusions of power. For the first time, she was not the one deciding how far this would go. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said, softer now, but no less firm. I'm doing it to stop this pattern, to draw a line you can't step over again. She nodded slowly, mechanically, as if her body were acknowledging something her mind had not fully absorbed. The room felt still, suspended. Outside, the world continued, cars passing, voices drifting faintly through the walls, but inside, everything had narrowed to this reckoning. I did not know yet how it would end. I did not need to. What mattered was that it had begun, not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth spoken clearly and without apology. For the first time since she left, I felt safe standing my ground. And I did not step back. The apartment felt different after Rachel left. Not empty exactly, but rearranged in a way that made every corner exhale relief. The air carried the faint, clean scent of permanence instead of tension, a smell I had not realized I had craved for weeks. I walked through the room slowly, deliberately, noticing the small changes I had made while she was here, how I had shifted the furniture back into positions that felt natural to me, how I had placed the photographs of John and me in ways that reminded me of stability, not absence. Even the curtains, which had hung unevenly during Rachel's stay, now framed the sunlight in quiet order. It was a light I did not have to share, and that simple fact was a balm. The pension was only partially recovered, but it was enough. Enough to refill the fridge without hesitation, enough to buy fresh vegetables and meat without calculating each purchase against the dwindling days of the month. I stocked shelves as if I were laying the foundations of a small, self-contained world. No extravagance, no luxury, just honest, sustaining food. Apples, carrots, bread, cheese, eggs, milk, frozen fish, and chicken. Each item placed carefully in its rightful spot, a testament not to wealth, but to security. Opening the fridge had become an act of reassurance, a ritual I performed without thinking, but with deliberate intent. I opened the door slowly, inhaling the scent of what I had endured and survived. The cold air met my face like a reminder that I had endured hunger, manipulation, and fear, and I had won not by rage, but by persistence. I thought about the weeks when Rachel had taken everything, how I had counted coins at night to stave off panic, how I had prioritized my meals into abstract, skeletal patterns that looked more like mathematics than nourishment. I remembered the nights of swallowing water to quiet my stomach, the nights of calculating which furniture to sell, which memories to pawn to keep food or heat. Every choice had been deliberate, and every sacrifice had been a lesson in endurance. Hunger had a clarity all its own. It did not lie. It did not soften. It simply existed, and you either endured it or gave in. I endured it. I did not just survive. I prepared for the moment when survival could become proof. Rachel had moved out, leaving behind the smell of sunscreen and entitlement. She had left hurriedly, quietly, as if her own shadow had grown too heavy to carry in a space I now occupied freely. Her departure was neither melodramatic nor theatrical. There were no slammed doors, no parting words, just absence, and absence in this case had its own kind of justice. It was the absence of expectation, the absence of entitlement, the absence of someone presuming that my strength was a renewable resource. She would have to live in a world where other people's endurance did not shield her from consequence, and that was a necessary lesson she had refused to learn any other way. I opened the fridge one morning, the sunlight catching the condensation on the glass jars I had filled with soups and stews. I lingered there, not out of hunger, but out of acknowledgement. I had survived the shock, the hatred, the anger, the sense of betrayal that had threatened to fracture the very structure of my life. And the moment of justice, the real, quiet, undeniable justice, had arrived without fanfare. It had not been a courtroom drama, a public shaming, or even a confrontation. It had been a sequence of choices, meticulous and deliberate. Documentation, accountability, persistence, and it had worked. Rachel's repayment plan ensured that the money she had taken would return to its rightful place, slowly but inexorably, a rhythm that reinforced both restitution and control. The fridge had become a symbol, more than a repository for food. It was a monument to what I had endured, a ledger of survival. Each container, each loaf of bread, each piece of fruit marked not just nourishment, but victory. The victory was quiet because true endurance rarely seeks applause. It requires no one else to witness it, and yet it speaks loudly to the one who has earned it. I had spoken softly, acted deliberately, and waited patiently. Justice, when arrived at in such a way, has a depth that spectacle cannot replicate. It settles into your bones. It courses through your memories like sunlight through glass, warm and unobtrusive, yet undeniably present. I sometimes linger by the kitchen counter, leaning lightly on the edge, and glance into the fridge. There is no drama, no lingering resentment, no desire for retribution. Only recognition. I survived. I endured. I prepared. I reclaimed. The hunger is gone, but its lesson remains. The anger is gone, but its precision remains. And in the quiet hum of the refrigerator, in the orderly rows of food that will nourish me without threat or manipulation, I find satisfaction that is neither loud nor boastful. It is mine. Quiet, deliberate, absolute. The apartment, the fridge, the reclaimed pension, they are more than material security. They are proof. Proof that endurance matters, that boundaries matter, that the care and discipline I gave to myself in the absence of trust can shape reality. In this quiet, ordinary space, justice has settled in, and it is perfect.